Thank you for asking me. I'm going to give a talk not so directly about shale gas itself and its exploitation and the supply side, but more to do with the wider framework for shale gas. In other words, gas. So a bit more on the demand side. And I think for shale gas to succeed, there has to be a somewhat more positive EU strategy for gas. Not sure I'd put this right. So at the moment there is a policy. It's very much related to the gas network, that making it work efficiently, but it's not really one that has any particularly positive promotion for gas. Now you might say, why should you favour a particular fuel? But I think there are some advantages to gas, at least in the short term, as a transition fuel to a lower carbon system. And I think in the current situation there is a little bit of a tension between EU policy wants companies, investors to sink more money into gas infrastructure, certainly. Perhaps gas generation, but on the other hand, makes clear that in the more distant medium to long-term future, it sees little future for fossil fuels like gas. So, sorry, I'll go back to this. So, Michael Schutz has clearly outlined what the policy is at the moment. I think that the Commission recommendation was completely appropriate. It wasn't terribly enthusiastic. A recommendation, I think, is the weakest form of policy that the Commission comes up with. There is some modest funding in for R&D for shale gas. This is, I agree entirely with Michael that subsidies for this are not appropriate or indeed politically possible at the EU level. But this R&D is for environmental measuring of such things as methane emissions, which are very much in our interest, to European interest, to measure properly. So I would argue that gas should have a brighter future than it does. It's the least carbon intensive of the fossil fuels, it's the big resources, and it's a flexible partner for renewables. But the prospects aren't good. Gas demand has actually been falling in Europe, and this is mainly because of the power sector, renewables pushing gas as well as coal, slightly less coal, out of the market, and it's only gradually going to rise, perhaps with maybe some new demand coming in for transport. The gas industry has been trying to convince policymakers that gas offers a more cost-effective decarbonisation strategy than certainly renewables and coal. But this hasn't really gained a great deal of traction, and they've given examples how it would be a considerable benefit, as we've seen in the US, in terms of decarbonising quite quickly the power supply. But as I say, it doesn't seem to have convinced people that much. So just like Germany, in a way, the EU as a whole lacks a gas strategy. Now, the pricing is key. Gas is almost always in competition with another fuel in a sector. in every sectors. So with electricity and heating, oil and coal in industry, and coal in power generation, and with oil in transport. So I would go along with most people's estimates that shale gas, even when it comes on, if and when it does come on in any volume, is not going to have a great effect on the gas price. In terms of the sectors of gas demand, well, there's a general gas decline for gas in heating. It's reasonably robust in industry, but there's a very sharp fall in the power sector. The power sector, which was responsible for the rise in gas demand in the so far this century, is now also driving the decline. And that's because of, largely because of pushed out by cheaper coal. Now here's a chart. The solid lines show the basically the price effect of more shale gas in the US compared to that, and they're gaining in manufacturing jobs. We're compared to Europe, and the dotted line shows basically the carbon intensity. And while the US is decarbonizing fast, well, the US is decarbonizing a little faster at the moment than we are. On supporting gas, well, as I said, I'm not in favor of supporting it, but I am in favor of penalizing coal. And one remedy, but it's neutral between gas and coal, are capacity payments, but they're going to support, as I say, they will support both, so there's no real change in the gas versus coal balance. Emission regulation. I'm not an expert on this, on the large combustion plant directive and the industrial emissions directive, but I think they focus more on other sulfur and nitrogen, and a little less on carbon. They don't bear heavily enough on carbon to, as things stand, to give gas a chance over coal. And an emissions performance standard, which has been agreed, let's say in the UK, is most unlikely politically to be acceptable at a EU level. One can imagine the objections from German industry. Reform of the ETS. Well, this appears to be it's been talked about for a long time, but possibly a growing possibility. This market stability reserve, which President Barroso, I think, promised Donald Tusk that it wouldn't when the idea was first proposed. He promised him it wouldn't come in before 2020. That's apparently why that was proposed. This reform was proposed so late. There appear to be a number of member states, Germany in particular, but others, the UK, France, other countries, some other countries are pushing for an early introduction of that, and that ought to do something to boost the ETS price. Some opposition from Poland to be expected. On the environmental aspects, now there has been a sort of, it seems to me, from EU policymakers generally, a hope, expectation that one day zero carbon renewables will be economic, and that is perfectly possible. But because of that, longer term hope, people have avoided giving any endorsement for gas in the medium term. So, for instance, electric cars have tended to be favoured rather than compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas vehicles. Of course, in terms of carbon, shale gas, the Commission estimate is it should produce fewer emissions than imported gas, and that's to do with the fewer carbon emissions than imported gas, and that's due to the transport, but it would be more than conventional EU gas. So there's a sort of mixed benefit there. And there's a serious caution about methane. Now, the degree of extra vulnerability of shale gas to methane emissions, I'm not expert enough on. But what I would like to underline is that the IPCC climate change panel has progressively revised up the warming threat from methane. And it was in the 60 a few years ago, it was only 60 times more than an equivalent amount of CO2. Now they're putting it in their latest report at 86 times more. So this is a serious caution for everyone in the gas sector, because methane emissions, raw methane going into the atmosphere, could negate its otherwise environmental advantages. I'll finish very shortly. Has Ukraine strengthened the security gas for shale, security case for shale gas? Yes, a bit, but really not in those states, not really outside Central and Eastern Europe. And it hasn't boosted the security case as much as it has for renewables, for nuclear. Seems to be, so for one thing, renewables and nuclear are known production techniques, and it's logical that you would depend more on them. The impact of Ukraine is been not so much to say we want more gas, but just different gas, diversification. And also it has to be said that the current fears about a cut-off of Russian gas to the whole of Europe are fairly limited. So I would say that shale gas is seen, and it was mentioned in the European security paper by the Commission in the summer, as part of diversification away from Russia. But that's always going to be difficult when gas demand is flat. If gas demand consumption in Europe was rising, it would be quite easy to start to increase the percentage of other sources. But with flat demand, and a lot of that demand met by under long-term contracts still to Gazprom, diversification is quite difficult. So, to conclude, I would say there needs to be more than just a policy on the supply side. There needs to be a wider, somewhat more positive demand side policy for gas. The difficulty is that this will need fixing various problems in the electricity market, which have become particularly complex. And I'll end there. Thank you.